would like to introduce our next host, Elizabeth DeBoat, who is going to host the first conversation of the event with Joanna Macy. And Elizabeth called herself a gender futurist. She's a gender and social change activist, and her focus has been for the past 4 decades to create. She's a women activist, and she has studied developmental psychology at Harvard University. And she's been curious in exploring how we actually create women and men identities, how our identities are formed. And during her time in Harvard, she also co-authored the best-selling book, Mother-Daughter Revolution. Her second half of her journey began by joining a spiritual community where she went deep into the foundations and practices to create, to understand really what creates the sense of self and how is it rooted in consciousness. Elizabeth works now with emergent dialogue practices to create experiential microcultures that create openly new potential for human transformation and culture. She's also a co-founder of One World in Dialogue, which is a German educational charity where she's also the editor of the Evolve magazine. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. What an evocative and beautiful beginning. Thank you so much. And I send my deepest heart wishes to my brother Bio. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and bringing that into the situation in Nigeria into our forum here. And I'm here to introduce Joanna Macy. And I'm sure many of you know who Joanna is. And I can't find you at the moment on the screen.
Hello, Elizabeth.
Hey, Joanna, it's so great to see you. You know what I'd like to do? I mean, I'd like to speak about you for a little bit. Do you mind?
Sure.
The things that probably are what brought everyone here today at this moment is to see you, obviously, and just that you've been a Buddhist practitioner for 50 years, as many people probably know. And your work is called Humbly and Beautifully, the work that reconnects, that was created out of your recognition that we were collapsing as a culture, that that we're in a state of collapse, and how do we create, how do we develop ourselves so that we don't go after each other, which was one of your main motivations. And you've written many books, many of them about Maria Rilke and translations of his amazing poetry, and we'll get to that. And a new one called A Wild Love for the World, about your work. And we had a beautiful conversation last week about this conference and about dying and living. And if you don't mind, I would like to start with our friend Rilke and see if I can get here we go. Okay. I found this quote, Joanna, and I thought maybe we could start with this from Rilke, because it reminded me of our conversation and what you were referring to, and maybe this can be a place that we can jump off. There is death in life, and it astonishes me that we pretend to ignore this death, whose unforgiving presence we experience with each change we survive, because we must learn to die slowly. We must learn to die. That is all of life. And then he goes on. And he speaks of a long ripened death that effaces its hateful name and is nothing but a gesture that returns those laws to the anonymous universe which have been recognized and rescued over the course of an intensely accomplished life. It is this idea of death, which has developed inside of me since childhood, from one painful experience to the next, and which compels me to humbly endure the small death so that I may become worthy of the one which wants us to be great.
Oh, bless you for starting with Rilke.
Mm.
Yes. And he reminds us from his earliest poems, but I haven't translated that one, that it's actually from a letter. It's prose, isn't it?
Right. It's from a letter that he wrote to, I can't remember who it was, in 1907.
Okay, just a second. Okay. Well, here we are, dying and living. And it feels so good to be here with Zara and Maurizio and all the others, and recognizing just the way we place the title for this, that we need to learn again to live fully. How do we live fully if we're scared of dying? The poets, and it's not just Rilke, are saying that they, dying and living, are two halves of a single whole. And in this culture, particularly in this culture of the United States, with its sense of conquest and manifest destiny and making its imprint, and we've got to do it now and have what we want and what we need and put our imprint, that we have learned to fear death. And it's always been easy to fear death because it's hidden from us. We don't remember an experience of it. Rilke, in the quote you just gave us, shows us where we can find it in the losses that happen to us every day. And they cause us to ripen our death by accepting it in our living. And when we learn to do that, we can live fully, we can live magnificently. And I would just, while you're bringing that, just give, before we turn to all the juicy topics I'm eager to talk about, ways that we can see what he's getting at with some of his language and poems. And this is from the first book that my co-translator and I translated into English, the Book of Hours. That was and he's written when he was in his early and mid 20s. Mm-hmm. And in one where he is, toward the end, really concerned for people who aren't given a chance to live fully because of poverty, and especially urban poverty, which cuts us off from the natural world. And then from on a poem where he talks about the great cities. Oh, they're great, but they're lost and rotting, and their time is running out. And the people there live harsh and heavy, crowded together, weary of their own routines. And then he says their dying is long and hard to finish. It's hard to surrender what you never received. It's a little death, hanging dry and measly, like a fruit inside them that never ripened. So we're called not just to live a great life, but to make a life so full of all that we can ripen a great death. And it's a death that comes from all that we have loved and accepted and let happen through us. So he says, his prayer is, God, give us each our own death, the dying that proceeds from each of our lives, the way we loved, the meanings we made, our need. And then he says, in another poem of this section, he said, Lord, we are more wretched than the animals who do their deaths once and for all, but we are never finished with our not dying. You just hear that because it clings to us. We can't complete it and we're afraid to do it. And so we're never finished with it. And then he says, we stand in your garden, Lord, year after year. We are trees for yielding a sweet death, but fearful we wither before the harvest. What a way of living.
That's amazing.
So actually, it was from in my early 20s. Remember I telling you about how I had learned what I learned from, did I tell you that?
Yeah, Hermann Hesse and Narcissus and Goldmuth.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s, and this was major for me because something happened for me then. Because I was living in Germany. It was my 5th year there with my young family, and I had in my last year gone to interpreter school. I loved that language, and one of the trainings for spontaneous interpreting is to pick up a book or a newspaper. That's harder. And as you read the German, read without stopping, read it out in English. And the book that was, I remember there were two books. One was My 7 Years in Tibet by, I'm forgetting his name, but you know what I mean. I'll remember it. And that's really, Tibetan Buddhism entered into me at that age. And the other was a novel. And the novel by Hermann Hesse, exquisite, featured as a hero, an artist, a sculptor, a lover of beauty and of life who fled the monastery for that reason. And the era was pandemic. It was the great plague of the 14th century. And he wandered out and he saw death everywhere. And he carved images of suffering and learned to love the people through that. And he also carved objects for church and statues. And his most beloved, the triumph of his life, toward the end of it, was the Madonna. How beautiful she was. All of his love for beauty and life poured into that. Well, he finally died. And he died taking refuge back in his monastery and with his old friends there. And as the plague, to which I'm not sure he died of that actually, but as he succumbed to death, and this I was trancing over and over again, it was seeping into me. What he loved of his life that he created in the Madonna accepted him, became his death. The Madonna became Mother Earth, Mother Death, the continuity of all that you can always trust. And she took, well, you know, after that, it changed me forever. I felt that this is a date, an appointment, a rendezvous that I can count on happening, and that I can trust. It will never let me down, and that it will feel like a completion. It will embrace me as he was embraced, and that it will represent in some confirming way all that was meaningful in my life. So again, life comes in, and an affirmation of your life in the act of dying, if we're fortunate. And I even felt through the years that I was I've been pregnant with my death. Trusting it, and that now in my 90s, I feel tenderness toward this aging body.
Oh, that's beautiful.
All the wrinkles lovely in their way. Just don't look in the mirror too much.
All of them earned. From smiling and laughing and crying, all of them earned, right? It's amazing that what Hesse is pointing to, and also what Rilke are pointing to, this having a good death, or meeting the completion of your life in death, that there's something so powerful about that. And just even imagine what our culture would be like if we wanted to guarantee that every human being had a full, ripe death. Wouldn't that be different?
Yes, because it ignites caring. And then that ignites wanting what each one deserves. And yes. And then because you realize that's one of the things, you've had this sense that you die alone. And I remember it wasn't long ago that I went through a day of horror just thinking that my beloved son would die without me, because he probably outlived me. Oh, he's going to die alone. Oh, poor. But then I realized, we all do that. That's for all of us. And just to think of that, or just to look at each other with the tender regard. And I see the faces along my screen of some I know and don't know, and you, my dear, and you also, and you too. You will die. Each one of us will. And just that, and you will meet it alone. You can't get in that moment of dying, you can't have anybody with you. And that awakes such a tenderness in me that whatever I think of him, I mean, even Trump, apologies to Trump supporters in the audience, but it's the equalizer. I care how he's being at that moment as he surrenders, because it is an alone time. You don't have a cheering section.
No rallies.
No.
No, but it is something that completely equalizes us, right? You can't buy your way out of it.
Yeah,
there's no, with all the billions that a few people have on this planet, they die too.
That's right.
They can't use that cash to get beyond this. And this is a place where we meet, and that recognition could be a very powerful force together.
And it's a recognition that we're all dying and living is so exquisitely revelatory of what can that mean to us now as our civilization is also seeming to die. It's nearing collapse. Whatever your political persuasion, it's pretty obvious that the global capitalist economy, the corporate grip on the world can't stay, is loosening. And that because it's driving us to make a death. So
actually, Joanna, I've never experienced this before. In your saying that, there's something so amazing that the bringing about of the death of our civilization is actually a potential liberation at a level that we can't even understand.
Yes, yes, it is. And that
with all the pain,
I experience, I want us to think in this wonderful sand experience. And this is my first time with science and non-duality, but I want to share my sense of our acceptance of our death and the dying of our economic order that is bringing on intensifying climate catastrophe. This recognition of death can liberate us and serve to free us from old habits, old fears, and free us to act with magnificent love for life and for each other, our precious ones, our beloved brothers and sisters. You see now, we're all caught in something. It's boring to up the kazoo to be born to hang on to old political and differences of opinion. But to let a sense of freedom of our solidarity, to awaken that, freely awaken our mutual belonging now in the recognition of what is dying in our world. Don't you feel it? It can activate.
I feel it.
Bodhisattva in us.
Yeah. I feel it. I feel it coming from you. I feel that liberation coming from you. That sense that you realize we live so often with ambivalence about being here.
Yes.
I'm afraid to do this because I want to get my life in order, or I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to be da-da-da-da, or I have to do this first, or I want to make sure that I have a life that's worth dying for. And it's like, but we're dying for the life that we have, because life is life in death. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
There's and we're dying into life. Yeah. And all that's dying is really our separateness.
That's right.
We are being released into our commonality. We're released into our belonging.
That is amazing. That is exciting.
Yeah.
That is very exciting. Not to trivialize. That what death is and the pain that people are going through and or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's
what I'm thinking of there, see, is using our mortality, using it now. Instead of pretending it isn't there, or what the poet said, our never ending, not dying. I won't do that when I protect myself. Just to let go of that and let ourselves be freed, liberated into a bolder caring. There is so much that calls to us now that we can do. We can still speak. We can still reach out. We can, not all of us are locked up in prison, but even today's news says that half of San Quentin has to be released. Since I have beloved inside San Quentin, I was thrilled to hear that. But but those of us who have cars and houses and freedom, and we can be liberated too. Imagine what it would feel like to use our dying as a moment to taste while I'm still alive what it means to be a free human.
Yeah. Wow. I think we should just stay with that for a moment.
Well, and now let me just, I want to, I mention what, and of course, if it's not too boring for our listeners, the inspiration comes from art and poetry, and in this case, again, Rilke. But when my husband, I had a great marriage. It lasted 56 years. And then he died suddenly.
Wow.
And actually, it was hard. It's hard in this culture. It's hard for the survivors. You have lists up the kazoo to do in the most boring fashion, handling property, handling all kinds of arrangements. But then the loneliness, and then the empty place beside you as you walk or as you sleep. And then I found in this passage, in a letter from Ryoka, that what made such a difference. And I want to share it. May I?
Please.
So the poet Rilke loved writing letters. He wrote, I think gazillion letters, and it's something we could start again, because that's such an act of generosity. And he was writing to a friend with whom he shared most of his deepest thoughts about dying. And he wrote this, the difference this made in losing my husband. Quote, "The great secret of death, and perhaps its deepest connection with us, is this, that in taking from us a being we have loved and venerated, death does not wound us without, at the same time, lifting us toward a more perfect understanding of this being and of ourselves." So in the moment of loss, what? A life without him? I've had almost 60 years with this person. Oh, I know every millimeter of his body and a lot of his soul too. Oh, and how can I? But then I knew it was true, that in that moment, what death was doing, it was letting us see each other somehow more completely, lifting us toward a more perfect understanding of this being and of ourselves.
Mm.
So then kind of veneration can happen, a little distance. You need a little distance to see somebody whole.
Mm.
I'm experiencing the same with a beloved one who died of COVID in San Quentin. I loved him. And now, but the distancing that his death brought, while painful, allows me to see his magnificence more. Yeah. And so then I don't know whether we didn't talk about sharing this, and I don't know how much time we have. Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Do we still have time? Yes, we do. We do, until somebody tells me we don't. Is that what venerating death or being at home with death can be cherished. My friend Barbara Green just reminded me the other day as we were talking about this, that it would be good to share. And is that I had learned from friends in the natural death movement, which is a great gift to our time, real technical details, how to keep the body at home. You know, my husband died in the emergency room, so I managed to get it brought back here because we had already arranged to have green burial in a green burial site across the bridge in Marin. And that was the second one of our country, first being in North Carolina, where nobody who's in bodies in formaldehyde, is that the word I want? No.
Embalmed.
Yes,
What's the word?
yes, that-
Yeah,
What?
they're not embalmed.
Yeah, not embalmed. Yeah, because it's
Embalmed.
toxic. We to make our bodies look pretty for open casket or something, we poison them and pollute where they're buried. And we decided not to incinerate because that's polluting. So having registered at a green burial site, brought Fran's body, his name was Francis Fran, home. And for 3 days, he lay in state while all those who knew him more or less, even people who didn't know him very well, would come by, and more than once, because of the quality of the atmosphere here. There was literally a fragrance in the air. People gathered around the bed where he laid like a Viking king on a boat. He looked so great. He was pretty handsome anyway, but even in death. And then there were chairs all around, and there was music. People would come and play music to him or read, and sort of like reading the Bardo, but and not for 49 days, but just for 3. And then during that, my daughter made the shroud, and people would come and have a chance to paint or stitch messages on the shroud. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of our lives, of his 3 children, his wife, now widow, and our friends. And they loved coming by and cooking up things in the kitchen. So that passage, I hope that it's okay. I think it is to share with you all, our community in Sand, that it is a wonderful development in our culture, that this honoring of the dying process and the death itself is so developed and welcoming now. And then we took him to the burial site that had been prepared. And you don't have to go so far down if the body isn't embalmed. We had a funeral there where we danced around the body. and sang some of his favorite songs. And then we didn't need, he was so stiff from 3 days of rigor mortis that he just could be buried, wrapped in his exquisite shroud made by so many hands. Yep.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it was from the very beginning of our journey as humanity that we know the beginnings and the ancient ones. We recognize that those who were walking on 2 feet upright, erect, were our kin because of how they treated the dead. It was through their monuments and their burial practices and the care, their love that they put, and their respect for the living that their ancestors had done, that they built the monuments that now we say, our ancestors, Homo sapiens sapiens, they were there. They were there. And we can feel in these practices around the dying such a link with the ancestral ones. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's beautiful that you brought that up. That I think Margaret Mead said that civilization began when we began to care for the dead.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Or culture began then.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Well, how are we doing on time? I don't know if I've been wandering all over the place or.
I don't know because we started late. How are we doing?
Yes, but
Isaiah and Maurizio can.
And if
wonderfully.
there's any comments, I think there might be comments for people.
We're doing really wonderfully. It would be really nice to bring some comments or questions from the community.
Great.
Good.
Yeah. So if anyone would like to ask a question or bring a comment, there is a small icon next to, on the bottom of the participant list that says raise your hand. You can click that and then we're going to bring you, call your name and unmute you and bring you on screen.
We're going to have 300 hands up there, Joanna. That's going to be fun.
And we will have time probably only for a few. There was one question in the chat that I wanted to actually bring, if that's okay, Elizabeth and Joanna. Dr. G, let's see if she can come on camera.
Yeah,
are you with us, Dr. G? Would you like to come?
There is she.
Okay.
Yay.
Would you like to bring your beautiful?
Good morning, good evening, wherever people are. Thank you, Ms. Macy, just thank you for your wisdom. There's nothing like intergenerational wisdom for me as I scroll through and seeing where people are. I relish the practice of death. I grew up knowing it. I feel like from birth and the rituals that my family held, both an appreciation of the life cycle, but also about the world that I was moving into. And I really struggle with balancing the understanding of freedom. We're speaking about death as freedom. We're speaking about the transformational process of death, and all those are truly, I feel like, mature thought. But how would you bring this practice to life, and particularly the lives of Black and Brown younger children, to understand and be able to begin to relate to this, when there have been so many barriers in our world to actually tasting what freedom might be like?
Well, my dear, I think that is I would do more of what I see happening now with Black Lives Matter and Black Youth Project 100 and the a whole network now, varieties of youth, mainly where the youth leadership is strong and where the feelings of strong, and this is, of course, as you know, particularly vital after the murder of George Floyd. But what has moved me so is that the rage that swept the country at watching the public suffocation of George Floyd by police who were kind of looking into the camera, there was disciplined, accepted, and turned not into random protest violence, violent protest, but exquisitely schooling people, taking their strong rage, refusal, using the organizing that had been done since Trayvon Martin's murder, since Mike Brown in Ferguson, and the intervening years, there has been awesome organizing on the ground, and mainly with where women, queer and transgender have been taking the lead, have built such a solidarity that they are welcome the young white youth, white identified youth that joined them in the protests. They were nightly here in Oakland. And I don't know where you live, dear, but they're probably there too, because these protests were evident in 40 cities across this country. And wasn't it wonderful to see them picked up overseas as well, in cities abroad? Mm-hmm. So that this, I think when I talk about the liberation we can find in confrontation with death, I now, with your question, recognize that that is also inspired by what I experienced and learned from the protests of Black Lives Matter and the related groups like that, and how they held. It was just beautiful to see, because the violence was they didn't succumb to random violence. That was something else that was tried to, I won't go into that, but it wasn't theirs. Yeah. So that's a way. Solidarity is a demonstration of liberation, isn't it? Mm. Mm. That was a question.
I would hope so. I mean, I think what's going on recently is not new to my life experience. I'm really wanting to, and I know the consciousness of humanity is that there's so much forgetting. So there'll be a forgetting of this, and the sensationalism of this will go. There's a sensationalism of Black and brown bodies dying. There always have been. It's part of our entertainment. So I'm really invested in just finding ways to, yes, the end is beautiful, but also like how to continue to expand this consciousness throughout our lives, and how we have conversations.
Yeah, that's a beautiful challenge. And I think it means being not afraid of grief.
Yeah.
If you're not afraid of death, then that helps to be not afraid of sorrow and grief and heartbreak.
Mm-hmm. There'll be a lot of that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. J.
Thank you, Dr. J. Should
We have time for
Sure.
maybe one more question, Joanna.
we sneak one
and
more
sneak
in?
one more. And next is Claire from Santa Cruz. Let's see.
You can unmute
You're
yours.
unmuted
Yes,
now.
Claire.
Hello, Joanna. It's such a pleasure to see you. And I wondered, in the description, it said something about the economic and political and surveillance systems that need help in dying, recognizing that we don't want fear and greed to be institutionalized. Could you speak?
Oh, beautiful. Did I say that?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that. Yeah. Well, thank you. Bless you for mentioning that. Let's get real. This needs to go. And that's why we need to feel strong in feeling in this, because I think the freedom we can find in accepting dying is a freedom of that blends with solidarity. We're rejoining the human family, and the political repercussions of that are powerful. And it brings refusal to do what denies the beauty and the power of the life in all of us. It brings respect for all life. Yeah, well, there's a lot of work to do. And it's true, we have, thank you, Claire, we have institutionalized, and a lot of it just in government agencies and ICE and Homeland Security in the last of this current administration. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And we'll say, we're going to die, but we're alive now. And you are my coworker and my partner, my compadre now. And now is the time we're going to find our strength and our commitment for life. And we won't be afraid of death. Not too much. We'll say, oh, it's inconvenient. Oh, I thought about a little more. I wanted to finish this. But basically, we're already home. We do know that, don't we?
Mhm.
Let's know it more firmly, more joyously. And thank you all. Thank you, Maurizio and Zaya, for inviting me to be here with you. And I wish that the unfolding of this program at SAND will be a joyous and liberating occasion for countless people now and in years to come.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for bringing your wisdom, your poetic soul, and inviting us to be and wrestle with this uncomfortable and heart-opening conversation and journey of dying and living. And thank you actually for helping us correct the title. It felt so much real when we put
Wasn't that fun?
For the living was like, yes, of course,
Because
we're going back into the trap of like constantly living and growing and expanding and not giving enough space for the other part of life, which is
because originally the title we had a year ago when we thought about it was living and dying. And
Yes, I know. It was in our conversation.
The conversation
we really need to rethink death.
the order was.
And let me,
And thank you, Elizabeth, so much for holding space for this conversation.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's such a delight to be here, to see you all, and to be with Joanna.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Much love.
Much love, blessings.
Always. Goodbye, you all.